The land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River is one of the most closely watched regions in the world. For decades, it has been shaped by conflict, diplomacy, displacement, and competing national aspirations. The current situation between Israel and Palestine is the result of an intense and ongoing conflict that escalated sharply in October 2023. To understand how the region reached this point, it is necessary to look back at the history that laid the foundation for today's reality. Archaeology and ancient texts tell a rich story of this land's earliest peoples. The hill country of Canaan, later called Judah, had small village settlements by around 1200 BCE. An Egyptian monument, the Merneptah Stele, circa 1208 BCE, even names Israel as a people in Canaan. Archaeologists now believe the Israelites emerged largely from local Canaanite society, gradually developing a distinct religious and cultural identity. According to the Bible, a patriarch named Abraham migrated from Mesopotamia into Canaan and made a covenant with God, who promised him land and descendants. These early traditions, including the exodus from Egypt and the giving of the law at Sinai, became central to Jewish identity and tie the people spiritually to this land. By around 1000 BCE, according to Jewish tradition, the Israelite tribes had united under King David and his son Solomon. They made Jerusalem their capital, and Solomon built the first temple there as a holy sanctuary. After Solomon's death, the kingdom split into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Each kingdom had its own line of kings and prophets and developed its own customs. Both built cities and traded with neighbors, but stronger empires were rising nearby. In 722 BCE, the mighty Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, destroyed many cities, and deported large populations. Only Judah around Jerusalem survived this onslaught for a time, though as a vassal state. In 587 BCE, Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar II besieged Jerusalem. He destroyed Solomon's temple and much of the city, and deported much of Judah's population to Babylon. This catastrophe is remembered as the Babylonian captivity. In exile, Jewish leaders and scholars preserved their faith and community. They compiled and emphasized sacred texts, and belief in one God, monotheism, became central to their identity. Many Jews remained in Babylon and other parts of the empires that succeeded Babylon, forming the first diaspora communities outside the land. In 539 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon and decreed that the Jewish captives could return home. Thousands went back to Judea, now a Persian province called Yehud, and rebuilt Jerusalem's walls and the Second Temple, completed around 516 BCE. Under Persian rule, life was difficult, but the Jewish community re-established itself around the temple, the Torah, law, and its prophets. Others stayed abroad and spread into the Persian Empire, continuing Jewish traditions far from Jerusalem. In the late 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, bringing Greek, Hellenistic culture to the region. After Alexander's death, his generals divided Judea between the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt and the Seleucid dynasty in Syria. In 167 BCE, the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes outlawed Jewish practices and defiled the temple. In response, the Jewish priest Mattathias and his sons, especially Judah Maccabee, led a revolt. By 164 BCE, they had regained Jerusalem and rededicated the temple, an event celebrated ever since as Hanukkah. This revolt established the Hasmonean kingdom of priest kings. The Hasmonean kingdom, roughly 140 to 63 BCE, was a period of revived Jewish sovereignty. The Hasmonean rulers expanded the kingdom's borders and enforced Jewish law. But by 63 BCE, the rising Roman Republic intervened. General Pompey captured Jerusalem and made Judea a client state of Rome. Eventually, Rome appointed Herod the Great as king, 37 to 4 BCE. Herod was known for grand building projects. He expanded Jerusalem and rebuilt the Second Temple on a grand scale, making it one of the wonders of the ancient world. By the end of this era, the people of Israel and Judah had established a deep connection to the land of their ancestors. Their religion, monotheistic Judaism centered on the temple in Jerusalem, was firmly in place. Empires had come and gone, but the Jewish community endured. This long history of kings, prophets, exile and return laid the groundwork for the centuries to come. By the 1st century BCE, the land known as Judea was no longer independent. In 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey captured Jerusalem, marking the beginning of Roman dominance over the region. Although local rulers like Herod the Great governed on Rome's behalf, real power rested with the Roman Empire. Rome viewed Judea as a difficult province, religiously distinct, politically tense, and prone to rebellion. Herod the Great ruled from 37 to 4 BCE. He is remembered for massive construction projects, including the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which became the religious and social center of Jewish life. However, Herod was also known for harsh rule and political paranoia. After his death, Roman control tightened, and Judea was eventually ruled directly by Roman governors. During this period, Jerusalem was a religious crossroads. Judaism was firmly established, but new religious movements were also emerging. One of these was Christianity, which began as a Jewish movement centered around Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus lived and preached in Roman-controlled Judea. After his death, his followers spread his teachings throughout the Roman world. Over time, Christianity separated from Judaism and grew into a global religion, but its origins were rooted in this land. Roman rule increasingly clashed with Jewish religious and political expectations. Many Jews resisted foreign control, especially Roman interference in religious matters. These tensions led to the first Jewish revolt in 66 CE. Roman forces responded with overwhelming military power. In 70 CE, they destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the Second Temple, a defining trauma in Jewish history. The Temple had been the center of worship. Its destruction forced Judaism to adapt, shifting towards synagogue-based worship and religious scholarship. Despite the devastation, Jewish life did not disappear from the region. However, resistance continued. In 132 to 135 CE, the Bar Kokhba revolt erupted against Roman rule. After crushing the revolt, Rome imposed severe punishments. Jews were banned from Jerusalem, which was renamed Aelia Capitolina, and the province was renamed Syria-Palestina, a name derived from the ancient Philistines, likely intended to weaken Jewish ties to the land. These events greatly expanded the Jewish diaspora. Jewish communities spread across the Roman Empire, including Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. While many Jews continued to live outside the land, they maintained religious and cultural connections to it through prayers, traditions, and texts that emphasized return and remembrance. Meanwhile, the population of the land itself became increasingly diverse. Alongside Jews lived pagans, Samaritans, and later Christians. Over the next centuries, Christianity grew rapidly. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, and by the late 4th century it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Jerusalem gained new importance as a Christian holy city, with churches built over sites associated with Jesus. Under Byzantine, Eastern Roman rule, Christianity dominated public life. Jews were allowed to live in the region but faced restrictions and discrimination at various times. Christian pilgrims traveled to Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth, reshaping the region's identity. Still, Jewish and Samaritan communities remained, particularly in Galilee and other areas. In the early 7th century, the Byzantine Empire weakened due to internal conflicts and wars with the Persian Empire. In 614 CE, Persian forces briefly captured Jerusalem, damaging churches and disrupting Christian rule. This instability set the stage for a major transformation. In 638 CE, Muslim Arab armies captured Jerusalem during the early Islamic conquests. The city was taken peacefully, and Islamic rule introduced a new political and religious framework. Muslims recognized Jerusalem as a holy city, while Jews were once again allowed to return and live there, ending centuries of Roman and Byzantine exclusion. By the end of this period, the land had undergone profound changes. Jewish political independence had ended, Christianity had risen from a local movement to a global religion, and Islam had entered the region. Control of the land had shifted from Jewish kingdoms to Roman emperors and now to Muslim rulers. Yet for all three religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam, the land remained deeply sacred. This era laid the foundation for later conflicts and coexistence. Religious attachments hardened, populations shifted, and memories of loss and belonging took deep root. These layers of history would continue to shape the region long after empires fell and new powers emerged. In 638 CE, Muslim forces under the Rashidun Caliphate entered Jerusalem, marking the beginning of Islamic rule over the region. The city was taken largely without destruction. The Muslim leader Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab issued assurances that Christian holy sites would be protected. Under early Islamic governance, Jews, Christians and Muslims lived in the land, each recognized as people of the book, though with different legal and social status. Jerusalem became the third holiest city in Islam. In the late 7th century, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were built on the Temple Mount, a site already sacred in Jewish tradition and later important in Christianity. This area became a shared but contested religious space, respected by all three faiths in different ways. During this period, the region was known as Yund-Filastin, part of a larger Islamic administrative system. Over the following centuries, the region was ruled by several Islamic dynasties, including the Umayyads, Abbasids, and later the Fatimids. The population was mixed. Arabic-speaking Muslims became the majority over time, while Jewish and Christian communities continued to exist in cities like Jerusalem, Tiberias, Hebron, and Gaza. Life was shaped by agriculture, trade, and religious scholarship. Although periods of tolerance were common, there were also times of discrimination, heavy taxation, or unrest. By the late 11th century, political fragmentation and weakening central authority in the Muslim world made the region vulnerable. In 1095, the Pope in Europe called for a crusade to capture Jerusalem, citing religious reasons and reports of threats to Christian pilgrims. In 1099, Crusader forces captured Jerusalem after a siege. The takeover was violent, and large numbers of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants were killed or expelled. The Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Christian-ruled state that lasted nearly a century. European settlers governed the land, while local Muslim and Jewish populations were largely excluded from power. For Muslims and Jews, this period was remembered as one of loss and foreign occupation. For Christians in Europe, it was seen as the reclaiming of sacred land. In the late 12th century, Muslim resistance grew under the leadership of Saladin, the Kurdish ruler of Egypt and Syria. In 1187, Saladin defeated the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin and recaptured Jerusalem. Unlike the Crusader conquest, the city was taken with relatively limited bloodshed. Christian holy sites were protected, and Jews were allowed to return to the city. Saladin's actions became a lasting symbol of Islamic leadership and restraint in Muslim historical memory. After Saladin, control of the region continued to shift. Crusaders returned during later crusades, but never fully regained Jerusalem. Power moved between different Muslim dynasties, including the Ayyubids and later the Mamluks, a military elite based in Egypt. Under Mamluk rule, the region was relatively stable but economically less central than it had been in earlier centuries. During this time, Palestine was not an independent state, but a region within larger empires. Its towns and villages were home mainly to Arabic-speaking Muslims, alongside Christian and Jewish minorities. Jerusalem remained a religious city rather than a political capital. Local identities were tied more to religion, family, and city than to modern national ideas. Jewish life during this period was limited but continuous. Small Jewish communities existed in Jerusalem, Safed, Tiberias, and Hebron. In the 15th century, Safed became an important center of Jewish religious scholarship, particularly after Jews expelled from Spain in 1492 migrated to Ottoman-controlled lands, including Palestine. In 1517, the Ottoman Empire defeated the Mamluks and took control of the region. This marked the beginning of a new era that would last 400 years. Ottoman rule brought administrative stability and linked the land to a vast empire stretching across the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. By the end of this period, the land had passed through Islamic empires, Crusader kingdoms, and renewed Muslim rule. Jerusalem had been fought over, destroyed, rebuilt, and redefined multiple times. For Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike, the land remained sacred. Yet political control continued to change hands, reinforcing a long history of external rule and local endurance. These centuries shaped the religious and demographic foundations of the region, setting the stage for the modern transformations that would follow under Ottoman rule. In 1517, the Ottoman Empire defeated the Mamluks and took control of Palestine, including Jerusalem. This marked the beginning of 4 centuries of Ottoman rule, one of the longest continuous periods of stability the region had experienced in centuries. Palestine was not an independent state during this time. Instead, it was a collection of districts governed from Istanbul, forming part of a vast empire that stretched across the Middle East, North Africa, and southeastern Europe. Under Ottoman rule, daily life was largely local and agricultural. Most people lived in villages and depended on farming olives, wheat, citrus fruits, and livestock. The population was mainly Arabic-speaking Muslims, alongside Christian and Jewish minorities who had lived in the region for centuries. Religious communities were organized under the Ottoman millet system, which allowed Jews and Christians to manage their own religious affairs in exchange for loyalty and taxes. While Muslims held political dominance, non-Muslim communities generally retained religious freedom, though they faced legal and social limitations. Jerusalem held special status. It was not a political capital, but a religious city sacred to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. The Ottomans invested in maintaining holy sites. In the 16th century, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent rebuilt Jerusalem's city walls, many of which still stand today. Jewish, Christian, and Muslim neighborhoods existed side by side, and although tensions sometimes arose, long periods of coexistence were common. Jewish life during this era was small but continuous. Jewish communities lived in Jerusalem, Safed, Hebron, and Tiberias. In the 16th century, Safed became a major center of Jewish religious thought in other parts of Europe, finding relative safety under Ottoman rule. Christian communities, both Eastern and Western, also remained present. Churches, monasteries, and pilgrimage routes shaped Christian life, especially in Jerusalem and Bethlehem. European powers often claimed to protect Christian minorities, increasing foreign influence in Ottoman affairs. For much of the Ottoman period, Palestine was a quiet backwater of the empire. However, by the 19th century, major changes began to reshape the region. The Ottoman Empire was weakening, and European powers were expanding their influence in the Middle East. New trade routes, modern schools, printing presses, and foreign consulates appeared in cities like Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Haifa. During this time, local Arab identity began to strengthen. Arabic language newspapers, schools, and cultural institutions developed. People increasingly identified not just by religion or village, but also as part of a broader Arab society connected to Damascus, Cairo, and Beirut. This shift laid early foundations for later Palestinian national identity, though modern nationalism had not yet fully formed. At the same time, Jewish migration began to increase, especially in the late 19th century. Jews fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe and Russia arrived in Ottoman Palestine. These early migrants, motivated by religious and cultural ties to the land, established small agricultural communities. This movement later became known as Zionism, a political and cultural movement advocating for a Jewish homeland. At this stage, Jewish immigrants were still a minority and often purchased land legally, sometimes displacing local tenant farmers and creating early tensions. The Ottoman authorities viewed these developments with caution. They attempted to limit foreign land purchases and immigration, but struggled to enforce regulations consistently. As Jewish settlements grew and European involvement increased, economic and social tensions emerged between communities that had previously lived with less direct competition over land and resources. By the early 20th century, Palestine had become a region of growing importance. Railways, ports, and new cities expanded economic activity. Yet political uncertainty was rising. The Ottoman Empire faced internal reform movements, nationalist uprisings, and external pressure from European powers. When World War I broke out in 1914, the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers. The war would prove decisive for Palestine. In 1917, British forces captured Jerusalem, ending Ottoman rule. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire would radically reshape the Middle East and open a new chapter in the history of Israel and Palestine, one marked by colonial administration, competing promises, and the emergence of modern national movements. This transition would transform a land once governed by distant empires into the center of a global political struggle. In 1917, during World War I, British forces captured Jerusalem, bringing an end to 4 centuries of Ottoman rule in Palestine. Soon after, Britain took control of the territory under a system known as the British Mandate, formally approved by the League of Nations in 1922. The stated purpose of the mandate was to prepare the region for self-governance, but in practice, British rule introduced deep political tensions that would shape the conflict for decades. One of the most significant developments during this period was the Balfour Declaration of 1917. In this statement, the British government expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, while also stating that the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities should not be harmed. This declaration reflected Britain's wartime diplomacy, but left key questions unanswered, particularly how 2 national aspirations could coexist in the same land. At the time, Palestine's population was predominantly Arab, mostly Muslim with a significant Christian minority, alongside a smaller Jewish population. As British rule continued, Jewish immigration increased, especially in the 1920s and 1930s. Many Jewish immigrants were fleeing persecution in Europe, including rising anti-Semitism and later the horrors of Nazi Germany. These immigrants brought new skills, capital and institutions, and they established cities, farms and political organizations. For the Arab population, these changes caused growing concern. Many Arab Palestinians feared displacement and the loss of political control over their land. While some land was purchased legally, tenant farmers were sometimes evicted, creating economic hardship and resentment. Arab leaders argued that Britain was favoring Jewish immigration while failing to protect Arab political rights. As a result, Arab nationalism in Palestine began to strengthen. Tensions between communities led to repeated outbreaks of violence. Riots occurred in 1920, 1921, and 1929, particularly in cities like Jerusalem and Hebron. In response, Britain issued reports and commissions to investigate the causes of unrest, often acknowledging the conflicting promises made to Jews and Arabs. However, British policies shifted back and forth, satisfying neither side. The most serious uprising was the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, a widespread rebellion against British rule and mass Jewish immigration. The revolt included strikes, protests, and armed attacks. Britain responded with military force, suppressing the revolt and weakening Palestinian Arab leadership in the process. At the same time, Jewish paramilitary organizations expanded, strengthening their military and political capacity. As violence escalated, Britain proposed solutions to divide the land. In 1937, the Peel Commission recommended partition, suggesting separate Jewish and Arab states. Jewish leaders debated the plan, seeing it as a possible first step towards statehood, while Arab leaders rejected it, opposing the division of the land. Britain later limited Jewish immigration through the 1939 White Paper, attempting to calm Arab opposition, but this angered Jewish leaders, especially as European Jews faced growing danger during World War II. World War II profoundly influenced the situation. The Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were murdered, intensified international sympathy for Jewish survivors seeking refuge. Many attempted to immigrate to Palestine, often illegally due to British restrictions. Jewish underground groups carried out attacks against British targets, demanding independence and open immigration. By the end of the war, Britain found itself unable to manage the conflict. violence continued and political pressure grew both locally and internationally. In 1947, Britain announced it would end its mandate and referred the issue to the newly formed United Nations. Later that year, the UN proposed a partition plan dividing Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem under international administration. Jewish leaders accepted the plan despite reservations. Arab leaders rejected it, arguing that it violated the rights of the Arab majority. The stage was now set for open war. As British forces prepared to withdraw, fighting between Jewish and Arab communities intensified. The British mandate, intended to guide the land toward peace and self-rule, instead ended with deep division and unresolved conflict, ushering in the next and most dramatic chapter in the history of Israel and Palestine. By 1947, British rule in Palestine was collapsing. After decades of unrest, competing national movements and growing violence, Britain announced it would end the mandate and hand the problem to the United Nations. Both Jewish and Arab communities understood that the decisions made in the coming months would permanently determine the future of the land. In November 1947, the UN General Assembly approved Resolution 181, recommending the partition of Palestine into two independent states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under international control. The plan attempted to divide the land based on population patterns, economic considerations, and political compromise. Under the proposal, the Jewish state would receive approximately 55% of the territory, though much of it was desert, while the Arab state would receive about 45%. At the time, Jews made up roughly 1/3 of the population, while Arabs formed the majority. Jewish leaders accepted the plan, viewing it as international recognition of Jewish self-determination after centuries of persecution. Although the borders were seen as imperfect and difficult to defend, acceptance was driven by urgency and realism. Arab Palestinian leaders rejected the plan, arguing that it violated the rights of the Arab majority and imposed a solution without their consent. They believed partition rewarded recent immigration and ignored their political aspirations. Almost immediately after the UN vote, violence erupted between Jewish and Arab communities. From late 1947 to May 1948, the conflict took the form of a civil war within Palestine. Armed groups on both sides attacked convoys, neighborhoods, and villages. Major roads were blocked, cities were divided, and fear spread rapidly. Jerusalem became one of the main flashpoints, suffering shortages and sieges due to its mixed population and strategic importance. Jewish forces, primarily the Haganah, gradually gained the upper hand due to better organization, centralized command, and access to weapons. Arab Palestinian fighters were less unified and lacked a single military leadership, which limited their ability to coordinate effectively. As fighting intensified, large numbers of Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes. Some left because of fear of combat, others following instructions from local leaders, and some after direct expulsions by Jewish forces. Entire villages were abandoned or destroyed. From the Palestinian perspective, this period is remembered as the Nakba, meaning catastrophe, the loss of homeland and the beginning of a long refugee crisis. From the Israeli perspective, displacement occurred in the context of war, with many Jewish communities also under attack and facing what they perceived as an existential threat. By early 1948, tens of thousands of Palestinians had already become refugees. On May 14, 1948, as British forces completed their withdrawal, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The declaration referenced historical ties to the land, international recognition, and the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. Within hours, Israel was recognized by the United States and the Soviet Union. For Jews in Israel and around the world, the declaration represented the fulfillment of a long-held aspiration. For Palestinians, it marked the loss of their land and political future. The following day, armies from neighboring Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, entered the territory of the former mandate. What had been a civil war now became a regional conflict. The Arab states stated that their intervention aimed to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state and support the Palestinian Arabs. Israel viewed the invasion as a fight for survival against hostile neighbours. Despite early setbacks, Israeli forces mobilized quickly, secured arms, and improved coordination. Several ceasefires were arranged through United Nations mediation, but fighting repeatedly resumed. By early 1949, Israel had gained control of about 78% of the former Mandate territory, significantly more than had been allocated under the UN partition plan. In 1949, Israel signed armistice agreements with Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. These agreements established ceasefire lines, later known as the Green Line. Under these arrangements, Jordan took control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, while Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. No independent Palestinian Arab state was created. Although the armistice lines were not intended as permanent borders, they became the de facto boundaries for nearly 2 decades. By the end of the war, approximately 700,000 Palestinians were refugees, living in camps across Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. Most were unable to return to their homes. Israel argued that the refugee problem should be resolved through regional negotiations and resettlement in Arab countries, while Palestinians demanded the right of return, citing international law and United Nations resolutions. At the same time, Jewish communities across much of the Arab world faced hostility, discrimination, and displacement. Over the following years, hundreds of thousands of Jews left, or were forced out of Arab countries, many resettling in Israel. These parallel refugee movements further deepened grievances on both sides. The events of 1948 are remembered in profoundly different ways. In Israel, the war is known as the War of Independence, symbolizing survival and the creation of a sovereign state. For Palestinians, it is remembered as the Nakba, representing dispossession, exile, and unresolved injustice. These opposing narratives remained central to the conflict. By 1949, the political and geographic reality of the region had been permanently transformed. Israel had emerged as a recognized state. Palestinians were stateless. Temporary borders hardened into long-term divisions, and unresolved questions about refugees, territory, and sovereignty remained. Rather than ending the conflict, the War of 1947 to 1949 laid the foundation for decades of struggle that would follow. For Israelis, the war was remembered as a war of independence, securing statehood after decades of persecution and displacement. For Palestinians, it marked the loss of their homeland and the beginning of a prolonged refugee crisis. These opposing narratives became central to the conflict and remained deeply embedded in collective memory on both sides. Internationally, Israel gained recognition from many countries and joined the United Nations in 1949. Arab states refused to recognize Israel, and the region entered a state of ongoing hostility. The Palestinian question, largely unresolved during the war, was increasingly marginalized as surrounding Arab states took control of Palestinian territories without granting independence. By the end of this period, the political map of the region had been permanently altered. Israel had been created as a sovereign state. Palestinians were divided between refugees, those living under Jordanian or Egyptian rule, and a minority who remained within Israel as citizens. The War of 1947 to 1949 did not bring peace. It laid the foundation for decades of conflict, shaping the struggles, identities, and grievances that continue to define the region today. After the fighting ended in 1949, the Middle East entered a tense and unstable period. The armistice agreements created new boundaries, but no peace treaties were signed. Israel existed as a new state, while Palestinians remained without a state of their own. The region was divided by ceasefire lines rather than recognized borders, and the issues left unresolved by the war quickly became sources of future conflict. One of the most urgent and lasting consequences was the Palestinian refugee crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians lived in refugee camps in the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Many believed their displacement would be temporary, but years passed with no solution. Refugee camps became permanent communities marked by poverty, overcrowding, and limited rights. For Palestinians, the refugee experience became central to national identity and political struggle. Israel, meanwhile, focused on state building and survival. The young country absorbed large numbers of Jewish immigrants, including Holocaust survivors from Europe and Jews arriving from Arab and Muslim-majority countries. This rapid population growth doubled Israel's population within a few years. Housing shortages, food rationing, and economic hardship were common, but the state prioritized building institutions, infrastructure, and a unified national identity. The borders between Israel and its neighbors remained volatile. Cross-border raids, infiltrations, and retaliatory attacks occurred frequently, particularly along Israel's borders with Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Some Palestinians attempted to return to their former homes or lands, while Israeli forces responded with military action. These clashes deepened mistrust and hardened attitudes on all sides. During this period, Palestinian political organization was limited. The West Bank was annexed by Jordan, and Gaza was administered by Egypt. Neither territory became an independent Palestinian state. Arab governments often spoke on behalf of Palestinians, but prioritized their own national interests. Many Palestinians felt politically marginalized, despite being at the center of the conflict. In the wider region, Arab nationalism was rising. Leaders such as Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser promoted unity, independence from Western influence, and opposition to Israel. Israel, in turn, viewed itself as surrounded by hostile states and relied heavily on military preparedness and alliances with Western powers, particularly France and later the United States. A major turning point came in 1956, during the Suez Crisis. After Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, Israel, Britain, and France launched a military operation against Egypt. Israeli forces captured the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip. Although Israel demonstrated military strength, international pressure, especially from the United States and the Soviet Union, forced a withdrawal. United Nations forces were deployed in Sinai, and Egypt regained control. The crisis highlighted how global powers influenced regional conflicts. By the 1960s, Palestinian political consciousness was growing. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, was formed, aiming to represent Palestinians and pursue the liberation of Palestine. Initially supported by Arab states, the PLO later developed a more independent agenda. For Israel, the PLO was viewed as a hostile organization committed to its destruction. Tensions continued to rise along Israel's borders, particularly with Syria. Disputes over water resources, border incidents, and military confrontations became more frequent. In May 1967, Egypt asked UN peacekeepers to leave the Sinai Peninsula and close the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, a move Israel considered a direct threat. Amid rising rhetoric and troop mobilizations, fear spread across the region. Arab leaders spoke of confrontation, while Israelis feared another war that could threaten the state's existence. Diplomatic efforts failed to ease the crisis. In June 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, beginning what became known as the Six-Day War. In less than a week, Israel defeated the armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, and captured the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights. The war dramatically changed the region's political and territorial reality. Israel now controlled territories with large Palestinian populations, bringing the Palestinian issue directly under Israeli authority for the first time. For Palestinians, the defeat deepened displacement and loss. For Israelis, it was seen as a decisive military victory that ensured security, but also introduced new challenges. The period from 1949 to 1967 ended not with resolution, but with a new and more complex phase of the conflict, one that would define the next several decades. The Six-Day War of 1967 reshaped the Middle East almost overnight. In 6 days, Israel captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. These territories were not formally annexed, except for East Jerusalem, but were placed under Israeli military control. This marked the beginning of a long-term occupation that would become central to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For Palestinians living in the newly occupied territories, daily life changed immediately. Israeli military authorities governed the West Bank and Gaza, controlling borders, movement, and security. While some Palestinians benefited from access to jobs inside Israel, many experienced restrictions on travel, land use, and political activity. Over time, resentment grew as the occupation showed no clear end. Israel argued that holding the territories was necessary for security, especially after repeated wars with neighboring Arab states. Many Israelis believed the land could serve as a bargaining chip for peace. Others viewed parts of the territory, particularly the West Bank, known in Jewish tradition as Judea and Samaria, as historically and religiously significant to the Jewish people. Soon after the war, Israel began establishing settlements in the occupied territories. These were civilian communities built primarily in the West Bank and Gaza. Supporters saw settlements as strategic and ideological, strengthening Israel's claim to the land. Critics, including much of the international community, viewed them as violations of international law and obstacles to peace. Settlement expansion gradually changed the geography and demographics of the region. In 1967, Israel also annexed East Jerusalem, extending Israeli law over the area and declaring the city its unified capital. Palestinians in East Jerusalem were given residency status, but not full citizenship. For Palestinians, East Jerusalem was seen as the future capital of a Palestinian state, making its status one of the most sensitive issues in the conflict. The international community responded with UN Security Council Resolution 242, which called for Israeli withdrawal from territories occupied in the war in exchange for peace and recognition by Arab states. The resolution became a cornerstone of future peace efforts, though its wording allowed different interpretations. During the 1970s, regional dynamics shifted. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Although Israel ultimately repelled the attack, the war exposed vulnerabilities and led to renewed diplomatic efforts. In 1979, Israel and Egypt signed a peace treaty, the first between Israel and an Arab state. Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, showing that land could be exchanged for peace. Gaza and the West Bank, however, remained under Israeli control. Meanwhile, the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, gained prominence as the main representative of the Palestinian people. After being expelled from Jordan in 1970, the PLO operated from Lebanon, launching attacks against Israel and drawing Israeli military responses. In 1982, Israel invaded southern Lebanon to push PLO forces away from its border. The invasion had lasting consequences, including regional instability and international criticism. Inside the occupied territories, Palestinian society was changing. Education levels rose, local institutions developed, and political awareness increased. At the same time, economic dependence on Israel grew, while land confiscations and settlement expansion continued. Frustration built among Palestinians, particularly younger generations who had grown up entirely under occupation. By the mid-1980s, the occupation had lasted nearly 2 decades with no political solution in sight. Palestinians felt increasingly disconnected from decisions affecting their lives. Israeli society was also divided, with debates over security, settlements, and the moral cost of occupation becoming more intense. In December 1987, tensions reached a breaking point. A traffic incident in Gaza involving an Israeli military vehicle and Palestinian workers sparked widespread protests. These protests quickly spread across the West Bank and Gaza, marking the beginning of the First Intifada, a mass Palestinian uprising against Israeli rule. The First Intifada signaled a turning point. It brought global attention to the daily realities of occupation and demonstrated that the conflict was not only between states, but also between a population and a military authority. The years that followed would redefine Palestinian resistance, Israeli policies, and international involvement. The First Intifada, which began in late 1987, marked a major shift in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Unlike previous confrontations between armies, this uprising was largely a grassroots movement led by Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It involved mass protests, strikes, stone throwing, and civil disobedience against Israeli military rule. Israel responded with arrests, curfews, and forceful measures to restore order. The images of civilians confronting soldiers drew international attention and reshaped global perceptions of the conflict. For Palestinians, the Intifada was an expression of frustration after decades of occupation. Local committees organized daily life, schools, and medical aid during closures. The uprising strengthened Palestinian national identity and reduced reliance on external leadership. At the same time, it came at a high human cost, with many killed, injured, or imprisoned. Within this period, a new actor emerged. In 1987, Hamas, an Islamist Palestinian movement, was founded in Gaza. Unlike the largely secular Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, Hamas combined social services with armed resistance and rejected recognition of Israel. Its rise introduced a new ideological dimension to Palestinian politics that would later complicate peace efforts. International pressure grew for a political solution. In 1988, the PLO formally recognized Israel's right to exist and declared support for a two-state solution. This move opened the door for diplomatic engagement. The United States began direct talks with the PLO, signaling a shift in international policy. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the aftermath of the 1991 Gulf War created new diplomatic momentum. In 1991, the Madrid Conference brought Israelis, Palestinians, and Arab states together for the first time in a public peace forum. While it did not produce immediate results, it laid the groundwork for future negotiations. Breakthroughs came through secret talks held in Norway. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords. These agreements were based on mutual recognition. Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people, and the PLO recognized Israel. The Accords created the Palestinian Authority, PA, granting limited self-rule in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. The agreement was meant to be temporary, with final status issues: Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, borders, and security to be resolved later. The Oslo process raised hopes on both sides. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO leader Yasser Arafat were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Israeli troops withdrew from major Palestinian population centers, and Palestinians held their first elections. For the first time, many believed the conflict could be resolved through negotiation rather than war. However, opposition emerged quickly. Some Israelis feared security risks and opposed territorial concessions. Some Palestinians felt the agreements failed to end occupation or stop settlement expansion. Violent attacks by extremist groups on both sides undermined trust. In 1995, Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli extremist opposed to the peace process, dealing a major blow to Oslo. In 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu was elected Israeli Prime Minister on a platform skeptical of the Accords. While the peace process continued in limited form, progress slowed. Settlement construction continued, and Palestinian movement remained restricted. Economic conditions in Palestinian areas did not improve as expected, increasing public disillusionment. Efforts to revive negotiations continued. In 1998, the Wye River Memorandum sought to implement earlier agreements, but implementation remained partial. In 2000, US President Bill Clinton hosted Israeli and Palestinian leaders at Camp David to resolve final status issues. The talks ultimately failed, with both sides blaming each other for the breakdown. The collapse of the Camp David talks marked the end of the Oslo era. Expectations raised in the 1990s had not been fulfilled, and trust between the sides was deeply damaged. By late 2000, tensions were once again rising, setting the stage for a new and far more violent phase of the conflict. In late 2000, the collapse of peace talks was followed by the outbreak of the Second Intifada, a far more violent uprising than the first. The immediate trigger was a visit by Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount, known to Muslims as the Haram al-Sharif, a site sacred to both Jews and Muslims. Protests quickly escalated into widespread violence across the West Bank and Gaza. Unlike the largely unarmed First Intifada, the Second Intifada involved suicide bombings, armed attacks, and military operations. Palestinian militant groups, including Hamas and factions linked to Fatah, carried out attacks inside Israel. Israel responded with large-scale military incursions, targeted killings, arrests, and closures of Palestinian cities. Civilians on both sides were heavily affected, and the death toll rose sharply. As violence intensified, Israeli public opinion shifted towards stronger security measures. In 2002, Israel began constructing a security barrier, part fence, part wall, mainly along and inside the West Bank. Israel argued the barrier was necessary to prevent attacks and reduce civilian casualties. Palestinians viewed it as a land grab that restricted movement and separated communities from farmland, schools, and workplaces. The barrier significantly reduced attacks inside Israel, but deepened Palestinian grievances. In 2004, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat died after years of confinement to his compound in Ramallah. His death marked the end of an era in Palestinian politics. Mahmoud Abbas succeeded him as leader of the Palestinian Authority, advocating negotiations and non-violent resistance. But his authority was limited by internal divisions and ongoing occupation. A major shift occurred in 2005, when Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip, evacuating all Israeli settlers and military bases there. Israel stated the move was intended to reduce friction and improve security. However, Israel retained control over Gaza's borders, airspace, and coastline. Palestinians were divided. Some saw the withdrawal as a step toward independence, while others viewed it as incomplete and symbolic. In 2006, Palestinians held legislative elections, and Hamas won a majority, defeating the long-dominant Fatah movement. The result reflected public frustration with corruption and the lack of progress from negotiations. Israel, the United States, and the European Union labeled Hamas a terrorist organization and refused to engage with a Hamas-led government unless it recognized Israel and renounced violence. Tensions between Hamas and Fatah escalated into open conflict. In 2007, Hamas took control of Gaza after violent clashes with Fatah forces. Since then, the Palestinian territories have been politically divided, Hamas governing Gaza and the Palestinian Authority controlling parts of the West Bank. This split weakened Palestinian unity and complicated peace efforts. Following Hamas's takeover, Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade on Gaza, restricting the movement of people and goods. Israel stated the blockade was necessary to prevent weapons smuggling. Human rights organizations warned that the restrictions severely affected civilian life, contributing to economic collapse and humanitarian hardship. Between 2008 and 2009, Israel launched a major military operation in Gaza following sustained rocket fire. The conflict caused extensive damage and civilian casualties, drawing international criticism and calls for restraint. Periodic fighting continued throughout the late 2000s, reinforcing a cycle of violence and retaliation. By 2010, the conflict had entered a new phase defined by fragmentation. Gaza and the West Bank were politically and physically separated. Trust between Israelis and Palestinians was deeply eroded. The optimism of the 1990s had faded, replaced by insecurity, division, and uncertainty about the future. By the early 2000s, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict had entered a period of prolonged stalemate. Formal peace negotiations had largely collapsed, and no final political agreement was in sight. The region was shaped less by diplomacy and more by cycles of escalation, temporary calm, and recurring violence, particularly between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. In the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority continued limited self-governance in certain areas, while Israel maintained overall security control. Israeli settlements expanded steadily, becoming home to hundreds of thousands of Israelis. Supporters viewed them as legitimate communities tied to history and security. Palestinians and most of the international community saw them as illegal under international law and a major barrier to the creation of a Palestinian state. The physical and political fragmentation of the West Bank made the idea of a contiguous Palestinian state increasingly difficult. In Gaza, Hamas governed under blockade conditions imposed by Israel and Egypt. Rocket fire from Gaza into Israel and Israeli airstrikes in response became recurring features. Major confrontations occurred in 2012, 2014, 2021, and later years. Each round caused civilian casualties and widespread destruction in Gaza, while Israelis faced rocket attacks, disruptions to daily life, and ongoing security threats. Ceasefires, often brokered by Egypt or other international actors, repeatedly halted fighting but failed to address underlying issues. Meanwhile, Israeli politics shifted rightward, with growing skepticism toward the two-state solution. Many Israelis prioritized security and stability after years of violence. Some supported annexing parts of the West Bank, while others favored managing the conflict rather than resolving it. At the same time, segments of Israeli society continued to advocate for peace, coexistence, and Palestinian rights. Among Palestinians, disillusionment deepened. The Palestinian Authority was criticized for corruption, lack of democratic renewal, and ineffective leadership. Elections were repeatedly postponed. Younger Palestinians, who had grown up knowing only occupation and division, increasingly lost faith in both negotiations and traditional political structures. International involvement continued but lacked momentum. In 2018, the United States recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, a move welcomed by Israel and rejected by Palestinians, who viewed East Jerusalem as their future capital. In 2020, Israel normalized relations with several Arab states through the Abraham Accords. These agreements shifted regional dynamics, but largely sidelined the Palestinian issue, reinforcing Palestinian fears of isolation. Tensions inside Israel and the occupied territories increased. Clashes in Jerusalem, particularly around holy sites, often triggered wider violence. The status quo at the Temple Mount/Haram al-Sharif remained fragile, with the site symbolizing both religious devotion and national struggle. Violence also rose in the West Bank, with attacks, raids, and civilian deaths becoming more frequent. In October 2023, the conflict entered one of its most devastating phases. Hamas launched a large-scale attack inside Israel, killing civilians and taking hostages. Israel declared war on Hamas and launched an extensive military campaign in Gaza. The scale of destruction, civilian suffering, and displacement drew global attention and intense international debate. Israel stated its objective was to eliminate Hamas, while humanitarian organizations warned of catastrophic conditions for Gaza's population. The fighting raised fears of a wider regional war, with tensions involving Lebanon, Iran-aligned groups, and regional powers. International actors pushed for ceasefires, humanitarian access, and hostage exchanges. Temporary pauses occurred but failed to bring lasting calm. Today, the conflict remains unresolved. Israelis continue to seek security and recognition. Palestinians continue to seek freedom, statehood, and dignity. Both peoples carry deep historical memories, trauma, and competing narratives rooted in the same land. The situation on the ground reflects decades of unresolved questions about borders, sovereignty. By the early 2000s, violence in the West Bank increased. Armed Palestinian groups carried out attacks against Israeli civilians and soldiers, while Israeli forces conducted frequent raids and arrests. Civilian casualties rose, and trust between the two sides continued to erode. The political horizon appeared increasingly distant. In October 2023, the conflict entered one of its most devastating chapters. Hamas launched a large-scale attack inside Israel, killing civilians and taking hostages. The attack shocked Israeli society and was described by Israeli leaders as an unprecedented breach of security. Israel declared war on Hamas and launched an extensive military campaign in Gaza, stating that its objective was to eliminate Hamas's military and governing capabilities. The scale of the fighting was immense. Gaza experienced widespread destruction, displacement, and humanitarian crisis. Hospitals, housing, and infrastructure were severely damaged, and large portions of the population were forced to flee their homes. Israel stated that Hamas operated from within civilian areas, while humanitarian organizations warned of catastrophic conditions for civilians caught in the fighting. In Israel, communities near Gaza and beyond faced ongoing rocket fire, evacuations, and fear for the safety of hostages. The attack and subsequent war deeply affected Israeli society, reinforcing a sense of vulnerability and trauma. Calls for security and accountability dominated public discourse. The conflict also raised fears of a wider regional war. Tensions increased along Israel's northern border with Lebanon, and concerns grew about the involvement of Iran-aligned groups. International actors worked urgently to prevent escalation while pushing for humanitarian pauses, aid access, and hostage exchanges. Temporary ceasefires allowed limited relief but failed to produce lasting stability. As the fighting continued intermittently, fundamental questions remained unanswered. There was no agreed plan for Gaza's future governance, no clear pathway to Palestinian statehood, and no renewed peace framework acceptable to both sides. Distrust reached new levels, and narratives of victimhood and survival hardened further. Today, Israelis continue to seek security, recognition, and normalcy in a region marked by instability. Palestinians continue to seek freedom, dignity, and self-determination after generations of displacement and occupation. Both societies carry deep historical trauma, shaped by wars, loss, and unmet promises. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a single story with a single truth. It is a layered conflict shaped by ancient connections, modern nationalism, colonial legacies, regional politics, and repeated failures to reach compromise. Each phase has left scars that influence the next. Understanding this complexity does not offer easy solutions, but it does reveal why the conflict has endured for so long and why its human cost remains so high.